Hey, good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. Again, it's Friday, January 20th at 10:05 in the morning. We've just completed our floor session and we're back into committee now. We're here to hear from our state universities. So we have with us Catherine Levasseur and Pat Moulton with us to talk about our state university, Vermont universities and workforce. So Catherine and Pat, welcome. Glad to see you again. Always good to work with you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to take a moment to set up a screen share. Very brief moment to do that. Andrew, could I have host ability? Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to come virtually this morning. I appreciate it. I was supposed to be going to Brattleboro, and that's a bit of a haul from Lyndonville. So that's gone all virtual. And so it was nice to be able to not be sitting in a car somewhere in Brattleboro doing this testimony with you. So
So it's one of the good things that came out of COVID.
yep.
There we go. All right, so my screen's caught up to me. So for the record, Catherine Levasseur, Director of External and Governmental Affairs for the Vermont State Colleges system. And I'm really excited to be in committee today. We have a lot of really exciting things happening at the state colleges, and I have a few updates to share with you. But first, I thought I would set the stage a little bit with who the Vermont State Colleges are and what does it mean that we're going through this ongoing system transformation. And I'll just take a moment to recognize our board chair, Representative Lynn Dickinson, is in the room with us. She's a former House Commerce Committee member. So she's back with her family today, now on House Appropriations. But Representative Dickinson is one of our legislatively appointed board members. The others are Representative Durfee, former Representative Bill Lippert, and Representative Jim Masland. So the Vermont State Colleges are the Community College of Vermont, Castleton University, Northern Vermont University at Johnson and Lyndon, and Vermont Technical College at Williston and Randolph. And collectively, we serve over 10,000, actually close to 13,000 learners every year. 83% of those students are Vermonters. And a lot of them, if you look at our student populations, a lot of them are concentrated around our rural campuses and our rural communities. And in 2020, with the onset of COVID, we experienced a really tumultuous time. And the legislature stepped in and said, we need to come up with a long-term sustainability plan for the state colleges system. And so they established something called the Select Committee on the Future of Public Higher Education, which gave us a transformation plan to pull the colleges into the 21st century, help us reorganize what we were doing, and help us better deliver services to Vermonters. So what we are doing with transformation is we are pulling the three residential colleges, so Vermont Technical College, Northern Vermont University, and Castleton University. We're pulling the three universities together under one accreditation and as one university. So that's a single program array. If you take a political science major, if you take an engineering major on one campus, it's the same as if you take it on another campus. A single leadership team. We hired President Parwinder Grewal this summer to oversee the new university, and a single program accreditation. And so that university will launch in July. So for the last couple of years, we've been engaged in this really intense transformation effort. And the first big marker for us is the launch of Vermont State University. So we're keeping the rural campuses open. And what we are doing is we're launching a hybrid university. And we're offering about 75% of our programs in an in-person plus modality. And that means that if I am sitting in a room with a math professor at Johnson, if I'm physically located on the Lyndon campus, if I am at home in Ludlow, I can access that course in person, remotely. I can access it on my own time. A lot of our learners are non-traditional students. About between a third and a half of our learners are non-traditional students. The average age in our nursing program is 29 to 30. And so these are students that have other things going on in their lives. Often when you think of a traditional college student, you think of somebody 18 to 22, maybe supported by their families, maybe having a traditional, four-year residential student. And what we're seeing is that more and more of our students are stopping in and out of college. They're going for short-term credentials. They're wanting stackable credentials and degrees. And they're really looking for an experience that meets them where they are in their learning and where they are in life. And so the creation of Vermont State University is really geared towards serving Vermonters at every step of the way and with a student-first mentality. So much of our work to date has been focused on that because as our project manager likes to remind us, we're about 23 weeks out from July 1st and when the new university will launch. At that time, the system will be the Community College of Vermont and Vermont State University. So we're keeping the system intact. We're keeping the campuses. But what we're doing is we're moving to a 2-university model and to a hybrid university model. Another big component of transformation is streamlining our back office functions and some administrative consolidations to accomplish cost savings and better services for employees and students. And then the other big component, which I will let Pat talk to you about in a couple of minutes, but we are also pulling together workforce development so that we have Pat, as the executive director, really running the operations of the unit. And the concept being, previously we've had workforce development delivered at the different colleges and on the different campuses in a variety of ways, but it's been very siloed. And with Pat in this role, we're able to really pull things together with one front door so that an employer can come to us and say, I need a training for my employees in this, or my employees need to upskill and achieve this new skill in this area. And Pat will work with the presidents, President Graywall and President Judy, as well as with the workforce development leads at the 2 universities to help find a right fit and right program for them. So it's really exciting to us to have this centralized function to better deliver for learners in the state. It reduces competition within the system and essentially helps us better serve the state and our students' needs.
Yeah, question about a student being able to watch a lecture from another campus. Similarly, is a student who's non-traditional, works during the day, isn't able to attend that Zoom lecture, can they watch it later and still get credit?
Yes. So I sat in on an applied mathematics course that was being delivered at Johnson and sat down with the professor and talked about with them after the course. And what he showed me is he had 6 students in the class. He had 3 on Zoom. And then he said, I have 4 more that he's like, one of them let me know that they needed to pick up an extra shift at work. One of them is having childcare issues today. And 2 of them, this conflicts with another class that they have. So they always watch the lecture later. What our systems allow us to do, and I don't know if every professor will go to this extent, but this professor is telling me, he's like, I can go in the back end and I can see who watched the lecture, when they watched it, did they rewind and rewatch this one section multiple times? Do I need to do a better job teaching that section because students are rewatching this one part of the lecture multiple times? And so it allows students to take courses asynchronously. It allows them to rewatch a lecture if they're having trouble with the material. And it's a really exciting concept, especially for non-traditional learners or students who couldn't be on campus between 10 and 2 when the majority of classes are offered.
Is testing also conducted asynchronously? I would imagine that could be exploited to some degree.
I think that depends on the program design and on the faculty. I do know that there were a number of systems and processes put in place during the height of COVID when we were very remote. But it depends on.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my apologies for being a little bit behind schedule. I'm Jared Sams from Castleton.
It's nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well. So I do have a question regarding the transitionary period, and it's been a cause of concern for quite a few of my constituents. Castleton, as its own entity, has existed in one shape, form, or another since 1787. So in terms of the branding that this is going to be moving forward with under the state university system, is Castleton still going to have its own brand, such as the Spartans logo, etc. The 17, I believe it's called 323 green, the color that they use for everything. I asked this because I was actually a state college graduate when I was still a state college, and I was actually in the special communications course to actually explore the option of it becoming a state university originally before this next step moving forward. So that's just my initial question is, where is that particular brand going forward here, especially as the largest entity in the system?
That's really, I remember that being a very exciting transition with the transition from college to university. We're actually seeing something very similar with the transition from like Vermont Technical College to university. There's a lot of students that are drawn to the concept of university, and there's a lot of students that are drawn to the concept of Vermont. And so we've actually seen an uptick in international applications with the inclusion of Vermont in the university's name. There's one brand and one university structure starting July 1, and that's Vermont State University. But what we are doing currently is there's no change to athletics next academic year. And so the Spartans, the Hornets, the Badgers are all retaining their logos and branding. I think there's a possibility of some tweaks to manage the name changes, but we are seeing positive response to that so far. And we did do quite a bit of research to understand what the best market niche for us was. And we got really good response to Vermont. We got really good response to university. And the naming convention of Vermont State University follows a lot of other states, Michigan State, Washington State, et cetera. And so we do anticipate, campuses will retain a campus identity like Linden, Johnson, Castleton, Williston, Randolph, but the overarching branding, because we're coming together as one in all forms, will be for Vermont State.
Okay, that's just one thing I just want to clarify on, because especially when it was still Castleton, it was Castleton, Vermont State College Systems. So is it going to be Vermont State University at Castleton, or is it going to be Castleton at Vermont State University? I think it's just one of those things, especially my constituents, they just want to make sure that the campus still has its identity, because that campus is really part of the soul of the town. And I have a particular attachment to it. I have my own biases. So that's just one thing I'm curious about.
Catherine, it's my understanding that it will be Vermont State University at Castleton, and that all the campuses will be Vermont State University at Randolph, at Linden, at Johnson. So the name will still be very much part of the name of the institution, name of the community, because I think everybody feels a lot of affinity in all 5 communities to their campuses. So I think we all share that concern. Yep.
I think that's been one of the big charges from the legislature a couple of years ago when we were set on this transformation plan, was the importance of the rural campuses, both as economic anchors and also as access points for education. And so we are keeping all 5 of the residential campuses. We are keeping all 5 of them open. We're just bringing them together under one name and one program array. I'll let Pat cover the workforce development unit a little bit more in her component, but I do want to touch briefly on a couple of the initiatives that the legislature has funded in the last couple of years. So with the influx of CRF dollars and ARPA dollars, there's been this unprecedented opportunity to invest in scholarships and workforce development initiatives. And there's 2 that I'll highlight today. The first is this upskilling initiative that the legislature conceptualized a couple of years ago. We've been able to offer this 3 times. So starting in fall 20 with CRF dollars. And this was to provide up to 2 free courses or training programs to Vermonters whose employment or their employability was impacted by the pandemic. Not only were we able to provide those those courses, but we also provided wraparound services. So up to about $300 per course per student. We were able to cover things like the cost of textbooks, technology to access the courses, if someone needed funds to assist with transportation, childcare, all of those barrier issues that prevent Vermonters from accessing education, we were able to address with wraparound services. So what this shows you is the number of students that took advantage of each initiative at each point in time, the number of courses and trainings offered, and the state investment. So we ran the last initiative this fall. I think there might be a trickle, just depending on how the final dollar amounts shake out for the fall. There might be a trickle of a couple more this spring, but these are the numbers that show you where the state's investment has really done good work. And we've gotten tremendous feedback at every point of the way. You know, the fall initiative was offered kind of in the height of stay home and stay safe for COVID. And so, you know, the concept that folks could take a class to help them change careers, that they could do a project management certificate or take a course that they'd always been wanting to take. It's really gone a long way with Vermonters and learners. And collectively, we've served about 3,000 people, which has been really, really exciting for us. The next that I'll highlight is the Critical Occupation Scholarship. And so this is something that the legislature has funded for the last 2 years. And this is last dollar tuition in certain essential occupation programs. So it's our nursing programs, our early childhood education, some of our other allied health like dental hygienists, respiratory therapy, radiology, plumbing and electrical. And we've been able to serve 1,000 students the first year, a little under that the second year with these scholarships. And last dollar tuition means after state and federal gift aid. So if a student is Pell eligible, their Pell grant is applied, their Vermont grant, all of their VSAC aid is applied. And then what we were covering is the true out-of-pocket tuition costs. So the costs that students would normally cover with loans or with expected family contributions. There were some income limits put on the funding, especially this last year. There were some ARPA rule changes. And so we put some income limits and other limits on who was able to receive the funding. But some really interesting statistics that we're seeing. We have seen, you know, the nursing programs both last year and this year. There are a couple of sites around the state that we have trouble filling. And the nursing programs were full or almost full for the first time in over a decade. The early childhood education programs have seen a significant uptick in the number of students pursuing those credentials or degrees. And then this fall, we actually saw an increase of 56 students, which is about 68% in the clinical mental health counseling program. And so directly assisting the state with mental health care and mental health care workforce. Another data point that we look at that's been really incredible is we can look at both federal borrowing, so that's more need-based, and we can also look at private borrowing. Private borrowing is something that students might turn to. It might be a bank loan. It might be a loan through another private entity. Typically, the terms are a little less favorable to students, a higher interest rate. You know, they're not like the federally regulated loans. We've seen a significant drop in private borrowing since these scholarships were initiated, of about 50% at 3 of the 4 institutions and 30% at the other. So all of this, you know, coupled with 802 Opportunity, which is the free tuition administered by VSAC at Community College of Vermont for Vermonters with an AGI of 75,000 or less. All of these have made significant progress in both reducing student debt, but also in bringing more students through some of these high demand programs for the state. And very briefly, I'll just explain our nursing program. We have a typical 4-year BSN, which is housed at Castleton University and on our Bennington location. We also offer an RN to BSN bridge program, which is offered primarily online. And then we have a laddered program. So at Vermont Tech, there's a practical nursing certificate that you earn your first year. Your second year, you earn your associates and can test for your RN licensure. And then your third and fourth year is that online bridge program to the BSN. And then we are also offering a master's in nursing at Castleton as well. And so we have this laddered approach. It's located in about 15 locations across the state, as well as 3 locations right across the river in New Hampshire where the hospital is, like Littleton, Dartmouth, Keene. And as I said before, average age in that program is 29 to 30. Vermonters are accessing that program because it's in their local community and they're not having to physically go to a campus. And while we are serving a lot of traditional students and a lot of students in the four-year BSN program at Castleton, I really want to highlight the dispersed approach we've taken. It's expensive. It is hard to find the faculty that our accreditors require. But the state's invested significantly in assisting us with that program, and we're seeing a lot of success with it.
If I may ask, what incentives are you offering or relationships that you're affording the students that allow them to stay in Vermont after they've graduated these programs? These occupations are all in demand everywhere. We heard from the captive insurance providers the other day, and there's a lack of accountants because they all graduate from Vermont schools and then go work in big firms in Boston and New York, for example.
So for us, a couple of things. Our tuition, we offer in-state tuition to Vermonters. We just announced that for Vermont State University, that tuition is under $10,000 as a base tuition for Vermonters. That's about 15% less than the tuition at the three institutions that are unifying. So we're offering a lower base tuition. Through VSAC, there's a lot of aid available. And then the state has provided a lot of aid, both directly through us for some of these critical programs, but also there's forgivable loan programs that are offered through VSAC for both early childhood education and for nursing. About 83% of our nursing graduates, whether in-state or out of state, licensed to practice in Vermont after they graduate. And some of that, I think, is due to the fact that they're already established here. They've got these partnerships at the hospitals, long-term care facilities, community partners where they've been doing their clinicals. They're offered jobs months before they graduate. System-wide, we see a little over 2/3 of our graduates live and work in Vermont. And so, I don't think we necessarily see what other universities see with an outflux of students. We really see ourselves as the entities that are here to serve Vermonters and are here to educate Vermonters.
Thank you.
So in terms of programming, now let's say if somebody wanted to take a certification program at Vermont Tech, but they also wanted to continue their traditional bachelor's degree, would they be able to take both programs at the same time?
I think that depends on the student and the program. The way that we're shifting with the new program array is no matter what campus you're on or if you're a remote student or not, you have a single program array, so your credits automatically transfer between campuses. This is something we actually found out. Often folks will ask us, what about the SUNYs? What about the main system? You have to apply for transfer credits between locations in those systems, and in the way that we're doing things, because it's a single program array, everything counts both towards your general education and both towards your program. So you could have somebody working towards let's say it's the engineering program at Vermont Tech, and there's courses at Castleton that they want to take. You could have a student doing that. I don't know if I could speak to, how specific things would stack together if they're not the same program, but the concept is that, wherever possible, we're opening up as many of those opportunities to students. There's things like auto diesel, like you have to do that in person. Your nursing clinicals, a lot of it, you have to do it in person. But as much as possible, we're trying to open it up to broaden the program opportunities for students.
That's fantastic because some people end up choosing non-linear paths and get additional certifications in addition to their education after they already graduate. So being able to have those two together, so that way, say, technical certification, if someone is trying to actually have a job to work and then they have something that they're pursuing that's also their passion, it's nice to hear that people might have that ability.
And President Graywall is really committed to the concept of everyone graduating with a credential. So I think back, I studied political science when I was in school, and I think back to some statistical analysis that we did for, I don't know if you know, Professor Brian, who's a former teacher at UVM who studied town meetings. We would do statistical analysis of the town meetings with him. And if I could have gotten a data analysis credential, that would have benefited me in my career beyond my bachelor's degree, that would have been really incredible. And he really sees this as an opportunity to do that and to embed some credentialing in courses and in every program.
That's fantastic.
Which is really exciting. And I know I have to move to Pat soon, but
My apologies.
Well, I was just gonna say, why don't you go to Pat? She may cover this. but I'm gonna talk about internships. I can talk to you later about the internships we have. We have experience with what we do with trying to get people who go to our schools for accountants specifically.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We have a board member who's the president of the bank, and I'll tell you about that later, but it's
Okay, cool. Thank you.
internships from UVM and Middlebury and St. Mike's, they move away. When you go to Johnson, you want to live in Jeffersonville and St. Albans and Lincolnville. So that's who he gets as interns, and it works.
Wow. All right.
So I will very briefly talk about enrollment and then I'll move to Pat. So these are our enrollment numbers for fall 22. I think the spring semester starts this week, and so we'll have an updated enrollment a little bit later. But what we're seeing across the country is about a 4.2% drop in undergraduate enrollment since the start of the pandemic. What we're seeing in Vermont is actually enrollment that's holding steady and increasing a little bit. So Community College of Vermont is up about 1% this fall, and system-wide we're up about 0.5%. And while we haven't returned to our pre-pandemic numbers, we've been bucking the national trend. There are so many articles that talk about the national trend of significant drops in community college enrollment. We're seeing it in some of our neighboring states, like 25% declines. And we really believe that it's the investment in 802 opportunity, it's the investment in our students and these scholarship initiatives that's making the difference for Vermonters. And we're also seeing strong enrollment at the Future Vermont State University. And applications are open, and we are in the process of enrolling our inaugural class this fall, which is incredibly exciting for us. So these are credit-bearing numbers. And so I'll also say, in addition to credit-bearing, we have over 2,800 students in non-credit courses as well this fall. And so that is everything from plumbing and electrical apprenticeships to a weekend butchering course at Vermont Tech, to an upskilling opportunity that we're offering to an employer to get their employees an additional credential. And so this is credit only. Non-credit, we have about 2,800 learners in non-credit as well, which is very exciting. And then about 82% of our students and our learners are Vermonters. And then lastly, in terms of degrees and credentials of value, each year we award in the range of 2,000 across certificates, associates, bachelor's, master's, and graduate certificates. In addition, I'll say we had 137 plumbers and electricians graduate from the apprenticeship programs. And this year, since the pandemic, we've actually seen a doubling of enrollment in plumbing and electrical. And when you speak to the program director and you ask, why is it that we have 600 people between plumbing and electrical? And she says that it's been the pivot to online for the course delivery. So there's the in-person component that they're receiving at their apprenticeship, but it's the online coursework. They're no longer having to drive somewhere in Vermont, one weekend a month to take the coursework. They're able to access that online. And so that's been a huge point of excitement for us. And we're hoping that we're assisting the plumbing and electrical workforce in Vermont with that as well. And I'm happy to take questions or turn it over to Pat to talk about the workforce unit.
I think it'd be a good time to hear from Pat.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, all. And for the record, I'm Pat Moltmann. I'm Executive Director of Workforce Development for the Vermont State Colleges. I very much appreciate the time this morning. I'm going to apologize because I have a hard stop at 11 for what is now a virtual meeting, so I don't have to drive all the way to Brattleboro from Lyndonville and back today. So my apologies if I have to jump off promptly at 11, but thank you for having us in today. And I am also the former president of Vermont Tech for the last 5.5 years and pivoted to this new role in July. And I think it's important for you to understand this is a new position created by the Board of Trustees, and I'm glad Representative Dickinson is there so she can add some color if needed. But the board really felt we needed to elevate workforce development within the Vermont State University and have it be essentially equally as important as the degree work that we do, given the needs for non-traditional students and others to get additional skills and credentials. So I work technically for the chancellor and the Board of Trustees. I'm in the chancellor's office, although like a lot of us, our office is wherever the car goes or wherever I need to be. So, and I will work with folks like you on workforce development policy. I also am working to try to attract additional workforce development related grants, as well as obviously work with employer and employer organizations to help identify the workforce needs that they have, and then bring those opportunities to both Community College of Vermont and Vermont State University. I will be working closely with liaisons at both CCV and Vermont State, Tiffany Walker at CCV, who some of you know and will probably be in at some point, and Jayshree Bhatt, who is a brand new hire and is the Associate Vice President for Workforce, Community, and Economic Development at Vermont State. So their roles are to bring those projects to fruition through their institutions, and to also work with me as I identify and develop additional opportunities. So the Vermont State Colleges those institutions have long been engaged in workforce development. CCV and Vermont Tech heavily engage in a lot of employer-specific training, but there's a whole lot that's been happening with the other institutions as well. And Catherine, you did provide, I hope, and I hope the committee received a 2-page handout that is a brief description of the various array of workforce development opportunities that are occurring across the institutions now. Everything from assessment of prior learning for folks who want to come and see if they can get credit for their prior work experience, all the way to customized training with employers, incubator without walls, heavy dose of apprenticeship that is happening. And the Vermont Cooperative for Practice Improvement is mental health focused. Castleton Center of Schools is K through 12 teacher education and credentialing focused. I won't go through them all, and you'll have a chance to read them on your own, but it gives you a sense of the variety of programs that we're engaged in. And they are, I mean, Catherine mentioned electrical and plumbing, and we are the sole related instruction provider in the state for that program. But we're also doing apprenticeships in sewing, sewists, CNC machinists, manufacturing and leadership, fiber optic cable instruction, airframe and power plant, and more opportunities seem to emerge regularly. In addition, there's customized training that we do for employers and employer organizations, such as the program we do with GE Aviation and Rutland, where those incumbent workers come and take classes from us in the evening, and they have to come to campus 1 week in a month, and otherwise faculty are going there to teach the program. The exciting thing about those types of apprenticeships, like we see with GE, GW Plastics, and others, is they're working on real projects, and they're often saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, from those projects. So they're learning, earning, and being very productive. And we also have a fun new little training that we're doing this spring with Sabre Marine in Colchester that needs to teach boat mechanics. And there's a dearth of boat mechanics. So we're doing a pilot with Sabre and Mercury University. And if that takes off, we hope we'll be doing more and potentially looking at that in the future as a track within the automotive technology program at Vermont Tech. You mentioned, and Catherine mentioned, certificates, professional development. We're heavily engaged in that. But we also do things like the Forest Products Accelerator at Northern Vermont University that Ann Nygaard's working on. And we offer a variety of trainings in the working lands arena, everything like Catherine mentioned on butcher and how you butcher, to identifying wetlands, to new agricultural practices, you name it. And you know, we're engaged in a lot of other areas. We're doing a 7-month leadership contract with the Vermont National Guard, as an example, talking to the Air National Guard about inclusion in the airframe and power plant program. And the sewing apprenticeship we're doing is with Forbital Factory in Burlington, which is a new sewing operation. I mean, and when you think sewing, I know some of us are flashing to a 1960s image of, 84 sewing machines, and it's hot and it's yuck. This couldn't be the more opposite at Forbital. And if you ever get a chance, go check it out. They're at the Lake Champlain Chocolates building on Pine Street, so you can stop and get some chocolate and then go buy some very cool knit products. But their goal is to employ people at a livable wage. They start them out with a good wage and 100% benefits, but to also teach them on site how to be an industrial sewing machine operator, And they are also doing contract work for companies like Skida and others in Vermont where they're sewing. So that's an exciting new project. We are also home to the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center, VMEC, as we affectionately refer to it. It's a federally funded program that provides direct technical assistance to manufacturers. And they are federally funded, and the state does provide a match through your general fund budget, and they provide a lot of free consultation and paid fee for service. And they're overseen by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is part of the U.S. Agency of Commerce. So I happen to sit on the NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership Board, and that's what VMEC is a manufacturing extension partner. And they have specialists that work all around the state. Similarly to the Vermont, we host the Vermont Small Business Development Center, which is technical assistance to small businesses. And they are state and federally funded, and they are a free service. They do not charge for their services, so they are heavily dependent upon the grant funding to be successful, and have done just amazing work for decades in Vermont with small businesses. Where are we going in the future? Catherine touched on some of this, but Vermont State and the Vermont State Colleges system, including CCV, will continue to focus and expand the concentration in industry recognized credentials, and in fact, embedding industry recognized credentials, as Catherine mentioned, in every degree program. Also looking to do more work in key sectors such as healthcare and mental health, and looking at the professional needs and what additional certifications or trainings could we develop to benefit those populations. And then obviously more apprenticeship opportunities. And then also Northern Vermont University operates a testing center for a lot of these certifications and licensing. And so looking at growing those operations. Vermont State University is committed to being a career-ready institution. So there will be experiential learning opportunities embedded in every program, internships and opportunities to work summer or shorter periods of time. And then also assuring we're obtaining those industry relevant credentials, so that that's another indication of mastery of skills that students can graduate. And then of course, heavy emphasis on remote delivery and enabling non-traditional students to access. We know there'll always be a group of people who want that traditional college experience, but I think some of the members have already talked about there are a lot of adults who need to either keep up a certification or want to learn new skills or change a career. And we want to make sure our programming is available for that population as well. So that's really what I'm about in 3 or 4 minutes or less. And I thought the rest of the time we could answer some questions. And it is a pleasure to see you all, some familiar faces. Congratulations to all the new members, and good to have you on board. And congratulations to all the members for coming back. It's good to have you all back again. So happy to answer any questions that you might have. I zinged through a lot of things, and there's a lot of extra detail around that. But part of my work is trying to attract grants, and this Vermont State is developing grant writing capacity and grant management capacity so that we can leave less federal money on the table and get more federal money coming in to the college, to the university, and to the community college. So happy to just answer any questions y'all might have.
Questions for Pat?
I know a lot. I never know which way to look. I know a lot of the work you're doing is sort of breaking new ground in the concepts of remote learning and multi-campus remote learnings, and I'm wondering if that has created any hiccups in the accreditation process in terms of because it is a new way to learn for a lot of students, and I'm wondering if that has proven to be a challenge. Or I know I attended your introductory online webinar for new legislators, so
Okay.
you spoke to that a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could share more.
Sure, and Catherine, feel free to jump in, but I don't believe we have any issues around accreditation. In fact, NETCHE, the New England Commission on Higher Education, which is our accreditor in this region, has been very good and has been engaged in the discussions around transformation from the beginning. Vermont State is fully accredited at this point. Obviously, there are reports that are due and when we've got everything put together. So no issues on that remote. In fact, NETCHI has developed a new policy to enable colleges and universities to ask for permission to deliver anything on remotely without having to go back to them every time and say, hey, we want to change the venue and deliver this remotely or in addition remotely. And that was approved. So it's we're making progress, but Catherine, you go ahead.
I'll hop in as well. And so we are getting a lot of positive feedback from NETCHI. We're also, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but we're being watched as an example across the country. Are a lot of changes happening in higher ed, but for most universities, they're able to tackle one change at a time, or they're able to nibble around the edges on a lot of changes. What transformation has offered us the opportunity to do is kind of pull everything apart, examine all of our processes, systems, deliveries across all of the colleges, and rebuild from the ground up. And so we've actually received quite a bit of national press. There's an article I'll share with Andrew that you should take a look at. But we've received a lot of attention for what we're doing because of how we're doing it. And one of the things that we've been doing for quite a while is, I mentioned that math class that I sat in on the Johnson campus. Johnson, Linden, and Castleton had been collaborating for a couple of semesters prior to all of the unification talk in math and business on unifying delivery so that professor specialty could be available to more students. And so we kind of built on what they were doing and built out a pilot program that's been ongoing this fall. We received a grant from the Davis Foundation to test this with faculty. And then we're going to be engaging in quite a bit of professional development and course delivery development so that our faculty are fully trained and ready to go, even the ones who might be a little nervous about delivering online for the first time, because we want to make sure that this is a really good, seamless experience for students and for our employees. So we're trying to kind of take it in steps. We've got a lot going on this year. There'll be more next year. There'll be more the year after that. But we are getting good feedback on hybrid. I think, and Pat, you might have to answer this, but I think some of our separately accredited programs, so you know how like a nursing program or dental hygiene, they all have an extra accreditation from a dental authority or a nursing authority. I think those programs are sometimes a little slower to allow us to do the remote delivery, but it depends on the program. And then of course, there's always general education that all students take that's available in the hybrid format.
Yeah, I mean, the nursing program has for many years been doing semi-remote delivery through a telepresence network where you'd have a faculty on one campus and then zooming that faculty to one or two additional sites, nursing sites. There are 12 nursing sites around the state. So CNEA, which is the Vermont Tech's nursing accreditor, has long approved that, and it's been great. And that's why, you know, Catherine's note about average age 29 to 30, these are a lot of career changers who wish to go into nursing. And that speaks perfectly to the question earlier about how many stay in Vermont. These, you know, a lot of the students that come, especially to continuation, these are Vermonters who plan on staying here, especially to continuing ed. They want to stay, they want the education, and a lot of our programs, I mean, 78% of Vermont Tech's graduates stay here. You heard Catherine say we're in excess of 75% of all our graduates. I think we find that at the Vermont State Colleges. We're the solution for a lot of Vermonters. So they stay. They want these credentials to stay and work here. And we're frankly feverishly trying to attract more here. So try to see if we can grab some of those traveling nurses and have them settle down. And that's a heavy lift because they make a lot of money as a traveler, but we're hoping they'll find quality of life here in Vermont to be worth the stabilization.
The remote delivery for nursing, we've spoken to this committee in past sessions about our challenge attracting masters and higher qualified nurses to teach in the nursing program. That's a requirement of our accreditor that a nurse must have a master's or higher to teach. The remote delivery has allowed us to stretch our faculty a little farther. And so if you have somebody, you know, at Williston who has the master's degree, telepresencing to the Newport site for a course or two, it's allowed us to address that. Not perfectly, but it's helped.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I actually just got an email from University of Washington where they're using where I got a master's. Where they're using Handshake to do online recruitment with a bunch of different employers. So I'm like, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna move. But it was an interesting thing of I could go on a job fair to Washington State to look at employers that probably nationally getting students. So that's a potential to get students to go consider going back to Washington or whatever. So we had guests in this week that were talking about holding a job fair in Essex, which my instant reaction was nobody from my region is going to drive up to Essex. And I understand that it's a population zone and things, but I'm curious with your push to hybrid and that kind of stuff with the digital learning, are you also taking an effort to do digital recruitment online to bring students back to Vermont and or just get the students that can't make it over to Essex?
Yeah, so we have, we have hired most of the cabinet for Vermont State for the launch. We're in the process of hiring out the rest of the organization chart. But there is a digital marketing position that we're seeking to fill right now. When you were talking about online job fair, it actually reminded me that for a couple of years, we've been collaborating across the system to host a single career and internship fair for students that's been virtual for students and employers so that they've been able to access each other in a virtual environment. And then we've also, during the pandemic and carried it through, we're offering hybrid and remote work environments for employees. So Pat mentioned Jayshree Bhatt, who's the new workforce lead at Vermont State University. They're currently located in Texas and with plans to move to Vermont, but the ability to do the job remotely has given them a longer lead time to find housing, et cetera. Another issue I know this committee works on. And we have a lot of employees that are taking advantage of that.
I would just say, Representative Priestley, how nice it is to call you that. That Monique and I have some history, so it's great. But we've been using social media, obviously, as a marketing tool for a long time. And the system will be getting Handshake as its alumni and tracking system. We now use College Central and Job Board. It's clunky, so we're getting to Handshake. It's so all three of the residential institutions will have that. So VTSU will have that. And then as Catherine said, that position is going to be focused entirely on those kinds of marketing opportunities. And I don't know Handshake from Adam, but if it's a way to deliver programming, that would be awesome. But so, yeah, there's a lot of new systems work being done around this transformation, as Catherine said, to be able to kind of tear it apart and put it back together the right way versus the hodgepodge that's happened over the last literally 150 years in some cases. So, yeah.
Cool. Just a follow up on that. So, as far as that's awesome. Thanks, Pat. And thank you. As far as the relationship with, say, getting the industry partners to get online with the virtual career fair thing, is that a hurdle, or is everybody on board to just do that jump?
Well, I will say students like to see people face to face, and employers like to see people face to face. So as Catherine said, we do the virtual career fairs, and I think we've sort of done a combination. I know we did face to face career fairs this fall and had, great turnout from employers. The problem we have is not enough space. We're turning folks away. And the second problem we have is not enough students because, we have a lot of folks coming to hire our grads. And especially in a lot of the engineering programs, there's just not enough of them. That's why we're able to maintain such a great placement rate. But, that virtual career fair concept, I don't think is going away anytime soon. But I know employers like to look you in the eye and shake your hand and some of those kinds of things. But yes, I think employers glommed onto it, but they would prefer to be back face to face. And so trying to find that right balance is the key.
So this hybrid model that you're embracing, is certainly bringing more students. What is that doing to the campuses and housing? There's a lot of housing facilities at the campuses. And I'm imagining that we're not utilizing those buildings as much as you used to. And do you have any thoughts or exploring what could be done with those?
Yes, so we are in the middle of developing the 10-year facilities master plan. We've been doing this analysis and planning work for a couple of years. And college campuses are really interesting, and each one of ours is built a little different. And there are things that we've had to think about, like the parcel sizes are really big. Can we, or how do we subdivide if we were to, sell off a certain building or a piece of land? Some of our campuses are built on a circuit, and so plumbing and electrical is all on a circuit. And if we needed to pull a building off, how would we reconnect the other two sides of the circuit? And so we've been engaged in all of this work. We're really in phase one of identifying use and overuse of facilities, what they need. We have a capital ask that we'll be talking to the institutions committee about. A couple of our campuses have very full residential capacities, a couple don't. And so in recent years, we've done things like housed Vermont Law students they haven't had room on campus in South Royalton, and so they've rented some space at Vermont Tech Randolph. We've housed traveling nurses for local hospitals. And right now at Johnson, we're actually housing international workers who've come to work for the ski season. We're housing them on the Johnson campus to assist Smugglers Notch Resort during the ski season. We have some employees that have struggled with housing and have, maybe we have somebody who I believe lives in Saratoga Springs, and they're on campus 2 or 3 days a week. And so they stay in a dormitory when they're on campus to help with their housing situation. We know that we're overbuilt on capacity. We're in the middle of this planning process, and we're doing we're looking at a combination of options, including repurposing space, public-private partnerships, potentially selling or leasing some space. One of the challenge with dormitories in particular is that a lot of them were built in a time when there was no overhead lighting. There's like a single restroom. They're not ADA compliant. There's no elevator. And so the conversion process to something like an apartment housing unit would be extremely costly. And so we're analyzing all of those options with all of these things in mind. We do still have residential experiences available on the campuses, and we do still serve a lot of students who are that 18 to 22-year-old. They either want or need on-campus housing, but we also recognize that, we were built up to the high school class of 2007, 2008, that peak year, and we're not going to see, that number of 18-year-olds going to college that we did 15 years ago.
I would just add to your question, Representative Marcotte, that we recognize that, some of the work we're doing around looking at possibly using career and tech ed centers to deliver some parts of our degrees, we recognize that that's probably going to mean a reduction in the number of students coming to campus. But since a pillar of Vermont State University is affordability and accessibility, those are how we're going to make the programs more accessible and more affordable. If students aren't having to pay room and board, that makes college a lot more affordable. So there is a little bit of a potential to shoot ourselves in the foot. However, I think the remote delivery is going to encourage and attract non-traditional students that are going to make up for that residential loss in the long term. So I believe it will balance out, especially, as Catherine said, as we go through the planning and look at reducing footprints and repurposing other buildings. Speak to Vermont Tech, we've been able to do that with a couple of buildings on campus, one not on campus that we've sold, and trying to get out from under that overhead. That's been successful, and still it's a long-term plan for all the reasons Catherine mentioned.
Great.
And I'm going to apologize because I've got to jump to my 11 o'clock, but it's great to see everybody. Happy to come back on any topic whenever you need us, as I believe Chair Marcotte. So we're ready to answer any questions you have. And thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Pat. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, Catherine, we certainly will be asking you back in. We'll want to actually go over some of the things that we did last year with you, and get some reports back on how things are going. The budget we'll be hearing this afternoon from the governor. I imagine that there's probably some things in the budget that appropriations may ask us to go over as well. And, so we'll be looking forward to seeing you again, but thank you for joining us this
Thank you. And if you need anybody from the colleges, I'm happy to help you find the right person.
Sounds great. Yep.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now we'll switch to corrections.
Sorry.
Commissioner, good morning.
Quite a pivot, huh?
Thank you for joining us. Oh, there is a nexus there a little bit.
There is, and actually some very good partnership, particularly with CCV and the colleges for both staff and incarcerated. So good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Demmel. I'm the commissioner of the Vermont Department of Corrections. Nice to get to meet, I think, all of you. I don't know that I've had the opportunity. Certainly fun to be in a new committee, and while we like Chair Emmons and Senator Sears, it's nice to have some variety too. I'm happy to talk a bit about our department, some of our demographics, how we're structured, but I want to make sure that we're responsive to your needs and your interests. And so please feel free to interrupt, ask questions at any point. I'll give you just a touch of background about me. So I've been the Commissioner of Corrections now for about 14 months. And in that time, I think we've made some pretty big changes, particularly in our workforce space, and hopefully soon with our incarcerated population, who we view as a potential workforce for the state of Vermont and in key areas. And I'm happy to talk a little about that today, but certainly more as the session goes on and we release some of those proposals. So I've been here for 14 months. Prior to this, I was an intelligence officer with the CIA. I was a lawyer on the Hill, an advisor to United States Senator and on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I'm obviously a lawyer by education and background, to give you additional context. The Department of Corrections here in Vermont is a unique beast. We're housed in the Agency of Human Services, which is a unique feature to Vermont. And I think that signifies that we view the practice of corrections as the provision of a human service, that really we're responsible for the custody, but almost more importantly, the care and the cultivation of the population that we're serving in the incarcerated setting and also in our communities as we manage all of the state's probation, parole, and furlough systems. We're also a unified system, which is unique in Vermont. So in most states, you have a county jail, local lockups, and they handle the population that's charged with a crime but isn't sentenced. But in Vermont, all individuals in any type of detention setting in the state come to the state correctional system. And so today we have just over 1,300 individuals incarcerated in the state. We have about 5,000 on community supervision under some form of supervision out in our communities. We have one of the largest budgets in state government. We have the largest general fund budget, about $170 million. We also have one of the largest workforces. Fully staffed would be near 1,000 employees. And so in total, we're a pretty big hub on a variety of different fronts with the incarcerated population, with our staff, and just generally as an employer in the state. We have 6 correctional facilities that are located geographically dispersed around the state. We have 11 district offices. We have our own academy where we train all of our correctional staff on really a nation-leading curriculum in corrections, something we're very proud of. And we provide a robust healthcare system, one of the biggest healthcare systems in the state after the major hospitals. We have our own education system that is everything from basic skills through an accredited high school diploma, not GED, but an actual diploma, all the way through, college level education, and kind of everything in between. And we also have an industry program that we currently have at certain sites around the state where we make furniture, road signs, license plates. We have a print shop that does state letterhead, things of that nature. And that system, I think, will evolve this year to be more of a vocational training model. So with those broad strokes out there, we have some slides that we can go through or leave behind, but I really wanted to make sure we were addressing the interests of this committee, and I'd be happy to talk through any of it or answer questions. We can talk about some of the ways that we've changed over the last year, particularly as it relates to workforce. But I want to be responsive to your needs.
So our connection with you is more on the workforce pieces, not just with individuals that are in the system, but also your workforce.
Yeah.
And the challenges that you have and anything that you see that we might be able to be assistance with. But we're also interested in, what's going on and the changes that are going on, like BCI and
Sure.
jobs and all that, and bringing, I think, a better educational opportunity to people that are incarcerated, so that when they come out, they might have a certificate at age and getting them into a job right away. And then I think one of the things that we've worked on and pushed on over the last few years is the issues at probation and parole, and making sure that people that have come out get into a job, that we're not pulling them away unnecessarily and creating issues with employers. And what I'm understanding, things are actually working very much better in that realm.
Yeah, I think so.
Which helps everybody. And I know, employers have been asking, how can we help bring on more people and people that are coming out of the facilities? They need a workforce, and it's all good for everybody. Jim?
Just curious off the top of my head, in contrast, those who receive vocational skills, what is their recidivism rate as opposed to those who don't?
Yeah. So I don't have that data off the top of my head. I mean, I think what I can tell you for certain is there are really two primary predicates to being successful when you leave a correctional facility and go out in the community. Do you have housing? And do you have stable employment that provides you enough means to survive, really? Some individuals also need some substance use support and things like that. So there are other legs to the stool depending on an individual's needs, but everybody needs housing. And nearly everybody needs some type of employment. And when we can provide those kind of foundational elements, we see a much greater success rate. The Vermont Department of Corrections is one of the only states in the country that has its own very robust transitional housing program. And that's a reflection, in our thinking that if we want people to really be successful, we want to put ourselves out of business, we don't want folks coming back into our system, then we need to provide them those basic tools. And I think one of the areas that deserves greater attention, and it's one of our key priorities for the year ahead, is matching them now with the job skills. So our population historically has been served by the industries program. And that is basically a business model structure where we make a product and we sell a product to certain customers, and the program should kind of fund itself. I think that was cutting edge thinking when those programs were designed, and have served a population very well over the last however many years, 30, 40 years since the programs were stood up. But what we're seeing now is the skills, the high demand jobs that are out in the community that we can't fill as a state, we're not training those skills to our incarcerated population. And so I think there is a bit of a delta between skills that we maybe give somebody and skills that will really help them on the outside. And so we sat down over the last couple of years using a couple of federal grants to really study this system and try to design it in a way that we're giving those key skills that people need, less business model based and more vocational training based, much like the community, the career training centers that we have out in the community. Why can't we bring a model like that into our system? We know we have private employers and public employers like the Agency of Transportation and others who are very interested in helping with training and getting people the right skills. And so whether we're talking about HVAC technicians, CDL driving license, a whole suite of skills that we have a shortage of in the state, we have a potential workforce that we can connect with those skills while they're inside, make that time inside valuable time to them as individuals, so that when they go out, they have much greater success.
You were here when Miss, I'm gonna butcher her name, the lady from Vermont State
Yeah.
Colleges was here. And you saw that CCV has a whole list of programs that are available to everyday Vermonters. Are inmates available
So-
to take those courses as
That's a
well?
great question. Historically, we've had partnerships with CCV to do some of that. There are natural boundaries, funding, and other things. But we're excited that last year, CCV and the Department of Corrections requested a federal earmark from Senator Sanders' office. He was able to secure that in the federal budget. And so we have $4.5 million federal grant now to deploy education to every incarcerated individual and every correctional staff member in the state of Vermont through CCV. And so that program is in design at the moment. The goal is to be able to have in-person classes, the asynchronous learning that they were discussing, kind of learn on your own time opportunities. And then as an individual were to leave the system, there would be hopefully a seamless transition. If you're halfway through an associate's degree in engineering, I heard they said was one of the programs, you might be halfway through when you get your release date, but then we can connect you right up with CCV in the community and keep that going. And so we're looking for opportunities to expand that. We've had a nice relationship in trying to get education into the system. The other kind of major change that's on the cusp is the federal government has reauthorized Second Chance Pell, which is a funding mechanism for justice-involved individuals to gain access to federal student aid. And that had sunsetted and then was gone for a body of time. And so that limit, if many of the folks who are in our system don't have the resources to afford higher education, but Second Chance Pell and this earmark through with CCV are ways that we can get them access to basically free education, which is great. And that feeds that same vocational training model that we want to apply to the system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Commissioner. We worked a little bit on the workforce development bill when I was helping corrections kind of see that piece of the bill that we were working on.
That's right.
It's nice to see you
Nice to see you.
in person. So I'm glad you touched on the CCV program because as we were working on that bill last session, there was a lot of things that were put on hold during COVID, and CCV, I think, had a very early sort of beta version of that program. So it sounds like this grant is new as of those conversations, or?
So you're right. So CCV had a program at Northern State, which is our facility at Newport, and they were providing education, and it did get interrupted during COVID, but they did restart the program, and that's going on. And it was essentially a beta version of what is now becoming a better funded Center for Education and Correctional Systems. And so we hope to build on kind of that groundwork that they laid, but spread it system wide so that any incarcerated individual could gain access to that.
Great. And I'm also really glad about the Second Chance Pell Grant because that was something that was not available for years. For folks, which was really a huge barrier in terms of financially being able to access and then transition once you leave, the facility.
And was really successful in its previous incarnation when it was in place. Absolutely.
One other thing I wanted to follow up on in that bill we had last year was the pilot program at the women's facility around helping to really support folks who are justice involved in the facility get ready when they're about to leave for sort of the transition to employment and figuring out sort of the months leading up to it and then the months after they're released to be able to really have all the support they need to make that transition successful with an employer. So I'm just curious how that's going, if that's up and running.
Yeah, so we have a couple of different programs like that. And those I think are going to be the demand signal for the future. That's where we're going. And hopefully we can do that at scale. The one benefit of the women's facility is its size. It's small. Today we have just over 100 women incarcerated in the state, and so we can do things there with that population. Plus, it's located in Chittenden County, and so there's just more resources available. So some of the individuals who are incarcerated there are getting ServSafe certification so that they could go out and immediately connect to high demand restaurant jobs or culinary work. Any of those types of programs, I think we want to explore and expand those opportunities because we've seen how that's immediately successful. And really it serves both sides of the equation. It's serving the individual who's incarcerated and eventually in the community, but also we can help Vermont employers to get good employees who have the necessary skills to just plug right in and I don't think anybody's turning away employers right now. Certainly we're not. So if you know anybody, send them our way. But it just seems like a win-win across the board.
So is it going well? I mean, is it
Yeah.
up and running and?
Yeah, and I think, I haven't checked in a minute, but there was also a program where they were hoping to connect some of those incarcerated women with Middlebury College and have a program going back and forth. So certainly we can get you updates on the specifics of each of those programs, but I think, we're fully supportive of that. And I think so far the success has been pretty high.
Mr. Chair, one more question, if that's okay.
Sure.
And so just going back to the transition, which is also quite exciting to move away from sort of the business model training that exists now in most of the facilities where there's road sign making, et cetera, and really being responsive to the skills that are needed in the Vermont economy today, which I think is such an important moment for us. We also hear often that the state as an employer has so many vacancies. And so just trying to be smart about, well, a couple things. One, the employer really stepping forward to be ready to be the employer to partner with folks who are just as involved coming out as potential employees, and then purposely, pipelining them to certain really high demand jobs that are career oriented and hopefully long-term jobs that people will hold until they retire. So I'm just wondering if that's folded into the thinking of the transition into these VOTEC kind of training for folks in facilities, so that we're sort of dovetailing our role as a major employer in the state, as well as the needs of the folks coming out of the facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. We've AOT is the one that kind of jumps to mind because they're a frequent partner of ours on a variety of topics, but they have a shortage of folks who are working road crews, driving truck, and so exploring opportunities to plug folks into state jobs tend to be fairly well-paid jobs, but also the benefits, the healthcare, the pension, things that would really help set people up for stability in the long run, which I think would benefit many of our population. And so as best we can plug holes in the state government, we'd love to do that too. And we've already had state agencies, a varied number, come to us to say that they would be interested in doing that type of thing. To just give one additional piece of context there, I think the goal would be to create technical opportunities at each of the facilities, but also more mobile kind of module training that we can move around. Because that's one of the limitations of our current industry system is we've got industries in Newport, we have some in Northwest, some at St. Johnsbury, but we can't pick that up and move it to Springfield. And so how do we flatten that out across the system so that anybody incarcerated in Vermont could gain access to that? And the same is true, we have some great programs that you highlighted at the women's facility in South Burlington. I can't take those to St. Johnsbury. So trying to make sure that folks gain access and it's a little more equitably distributed.
I think we had some conversations with institutions committee a few years ago about purchasing some mobile units that could be used not just by CTEs but could be used by corrections as well. So it could be moved from St. Johnsbury to Newport, to St. Albans, to Springfield, to wherever. That I'm not sure. I don't think it panned out in the end, but I think that's maybe something we could continue to talk about and see if we can revisit that model and see what needs to be purchased.
And I think that is part of the goal here with our redesign is to do things like that. But we've also had employers come to us and say, we will bring everything to you. You just let us show up and we'll train your folks on. I mentioned the HVAC tech. That's one that comes to mind. They can bring their own mobile lab. They have everything they need and get folks trained up. And so leveraging partnerships, finding the right jobs to connect folks with. I think it's
the same with the oil burners and propane. Matt Coda designed a program a few years ago where they would provide all the materials and probably an instructor that could help teach how to fix a oil boiler or oil burner and installations and propane. So there's a lot of things out there that could be done to assist in getting the entry level certifications that people.
Yeah.
Were you able to solve, or are you in the process of solving the issue of people coming out that don't have an identification.
Yes. Yeah, there are still some limitations, but by and large, through a partnership with the Department of Motor Vehicles, we're able to provide every incarcerated individual with not just a driver's license, but we can also get them their vital documents like social security cards or birth certificates if they don't have those. That's part of the case planning that happens now with every individual. And that's doesn't sound like much, right? You got a state ID, but it's usually required to get employment in the state. It's a big deal for folks. Yep.
To get other
Exactly.
services without a government issued ID, it's pretty tough.
And we, of course, everything doesn't go perfectly. We hear some folks don't get out with their ID card or it takes delays. But wherever we've heard of that, we've tried to really target those problems and streamline that process. And we'll continue to do that. We have an entire staff member at the central office dedicated just to facilitating all of those processes for the caseworkers, working with the DMV, with Social Security. If I could pivot just for a sec back to our own staff, because that was the other part of the equation you'd asked about. I know we've talked a lot about the incarcerated population. We are experiencing a systemic, generations long staffing challenge in the Department of Corrections. I don't think that's a big secret to anybody. I think last summer we hit the bottom, hopefully it's the bottom of really a tough spot with staffing. So at that point, we had about a 30% vacancy rate within our security staff positions. Those are the folks who keep our facilities safe and secure. We had 2 facilities that we had to move over to an emergency staffing model because the safety of the facility was jeopardized by the low number of staff that we had. So last summer we deployed a plan. We worked with a lot of line staff to understand what the major pain points in the system were. We retooled the way we did recruiting and then designed this plan and deployed it. We call it the Stability and Sustainability Plan, and it really was targeted at the key pain points in the system. We redesigned our schedules. We moved our all 6 facilities to 12-hour shifts. 4 of the 6 are on what we call a 50-50 schedule. So basically you work 7 of 14 days in a pay period. Or as one of my staff members likes to say, you take a calendar for the year and you rip it in half. Half those days you work, half those days you have off. And that's really, I think, the future of corrections. Because the clearest pain point that we heard from our staff is we work too much. We don't get to go home and see our families. I have no hobbies. I have no downtime. All I do is work in the prison. And so we redesigned our schedule to try to really address that. We also reached an agreement with our labor partners to infuse more targeted pay enhancements to staff, particularly the security staff who are working in those facilities. I said we retooled our recruitment and retention. All of that I think is important. Those are some major structural changes. But the other piece of this that I think, underpins our thinking on workforce and recruitment and retention is we needed to reinvest in the human beings who comprise our team, our staff. And I think we drifted a little bit from that over the years. And so that's, staff wellness, taking care of people. Corrections jobs are trauma filled. They're violent workplaces at times. It's physically a hard environment to work in. The floors are hard. It's loud. All these things packaged together make it a very challenging place to work. And so how do we take care of those folks? If they're willing to come do this for the state of Vermont, what do we do to invest in them? What do we do to show that the department's there to back them up? And so we really rethought that. But we also started thinking about who we recruit. I mean, we're at a point now where we're really only recruiting 2 generations of potential applicants, millennials and Gen Z. I mean, by and large, we're not getting folks in their 40s or 50s who are starting a career in corrections. We're getting folks who are in those other 2 generations. And what the data would suggest to us is that those generations are motivated by different things than what we recruited for in the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s. And so we have a workforce that does have those other generations in it, and we need to account for that and take care of those folks. But we also know that the recruiting strategies we always use don't work anymore. And so really breaking down the thinking and trying to pinpoint what will motivate folks. We know millennials and Gen Z are motivated by mission. Can they see themselves contributing to the public good? Well, we do that on a daily basis. They want diversity in their careers. So how do we create career roadmaps where they would get opportunities to do different things? I mean, the Department of Corrections is huge, and we have a diverse array of jobs, of skills available. But if you're hired tomorrow and then are told you're going to work in a living unit for 15 straight years before you get a weekend off or before you get any diversity of experience, people aren't going to stay very long. And we saw that over and over again. And so, we've used all these tools historically. We raised wages, we've done all this stuff, but we always got the same result. It may be a blip, things went better, but then they're right back to where we started. And so we recognize we really need to break this apart and rebuild for the future. The other thing the data tells us is we're not going to turn a corner and all of a sudden there's going to be corrections folks lined up ready to start the job. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Based on population demographics nationally, and particularly in Vermont, population's getting older, the workforce is shrinking, there aren't going to be more people. So we need to figure out how we can do the job with fewer people in different ways. And so that is the approach we've taken through some different comprehensive plans to address our workforce. We dropped our vacancy rate by 5% in 5 months, which I think is a pretty good mark so far of how those plans are working. So we're down to just under a 25% vacancy rate among security staff today. We hope to drive that number down lower. We're going to always have some vacancies, but if we could get to a 15% range, that would be a huge watershed change for the Department of Corrections. And so we'll keep you posted on those, but I wanted to capture that piece of the conversation too, because it's really important to the work that we've done and trying to recommit to our team.
This is going to sound silly on one hand, but do you ever recruit from ex-cons?
No, generally not. We have recruited folks who have been justice involved, who have, some type of criminal background or some activity in their background. Generally, those things have to be, you get a DUI or, we're pretty discerning about what types of previous charges we will, waive the requirements for. But there's also federal law that restricts formerly incarcerated individuals' involvement in incarcerated settings going forward. And we run into that a lot with volunteers and people who want to contribute back. Sometimes the rules that we have to live by don't permit.
I can also see that it would be fraud.
It could be, yeah. But, as best we can, we've worked with those groups to get involved in the system. We have a lot of formerly incarcerated individuals who do volunteer and participate in different ways. But typically they're not eligible for employment in DOC anyway.
Commissioner, thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. We still will continue to work with you and with our Corrections and Institutions Committee on workforce and your staff and with people that are in the facility as well. So
great.
Anything we can do to help, we're willing to do that.
I appreciate that very much. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Reach out.
Good morning.
Joining us.
Absolutely.
Generally, just for the committee's sake, might be wondering why we have legal aid coming in, but we do work with legal aid. We've worked with legal aid on unemployment issues. We've worked with legal aid on consumer protection issues. So I think it's good to, ask them to come in and just give the committee an idea of what legal aid does, and so they know who to talk to and who the people are that we work with. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. And for the record, my name is Rachel Seelig. I am the director of the Disability Law Project at Vermont Legal Aid. I'm also our staff attorney for government relations. We run a pretty skinny operation, so I have two roles at Legal Aid at this point. I'm going to pass around so that you have it, a description of the 11 different projects that we currently operate at Legal Aid, as well as the names of the folks who direct those projects, our email addresses, and our phone numbers, in case you need to reach us. Vermont Legal Aid is the largest civil legal services organization in Vermont. We have a partner organization, Legal Services Vermont. And between the two organizations, we respond to more than 20,000 calls for legal assistance every year. The number has more than doubled since the beginning of the pandemic, and each call takes about 3 times as long as it used to take because people's civil legal issues are more complicated than they once were. During the pandemic, we certainly did some work in shifting around in order to meet new needs in the community. I brought Kelly Kosmarski with me today. Kelly is a staff attorney in our St. Johnsbury office and specializes, among other things, in unemployment insurance. And so when you are working on unemployment, Kelly will be our expert in the room for you. But I want to talk a little bit about legal aid kind of generally and how we can be of service to you, because you all both have all of your work to do here in this building, trying to set policy and pass laws for the state, and you have constituents calling you who need help. And this is a place where we can be helpful because a lot of times they're calling you with issues where getting some advice from a lawyer can be really helpful. And so when those situations come up, yes, you have the names of all these different folks. No, you don't have to worry about exactly which project they might fit into. Reach out to me or to Mike Fisher, who would have been here, but he now has another meeting he needs to be at. The two of us are in the building a lot, and what we can do is connect your constituent with the right part of legal aid for their help. I think a lot of people have the perception that legal aid only serves folks who are super low income. We do have a couple of projects that are income restricted, but many projects, including mine, we can serve people of any income as long as they're a Vermont resident. That's also true of our healthcare advocates office. They assist folks with all sorts of different access to healthcare issues, whether it's health insurance, access to a provider, access to medication because they got to the pharmacy and learned that their health insurance information was not correct or up to date. So, those we can help all sorts of folks with that. We assist folks with benefits issues, housing issues, civil rights, education, employment, you name it. We're a pretty broad organization at this point. At the same time, one of the things that's been interesting sitting here and listening to your two previous presenters today is how much workforce actually is impacting our clients right now. In the Disability Law Project, we have clients who only communicate through what's called facilitated communication, where someone assists them in typing as a way of speaking. And we have clients who have not had anyone available to do that for them for 2 years or longer, who've had just like no services. They're stuck at home with their family. So we see that impact. We see folks who can't get home health nursing because the home health agencies don't have enough staff. We have clients who are stuck in hospitals because they can't discharge to a less restrictive environment because there aren't enough folks to provide those services in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. So those issues, certainly impact our clients. And I think we don't always have the solutions, but we can absolutely bring you the stories of how that's impacting the recipients, in addition to, bringing in folks from the nursing homes and home health agencies on how it's impacting their workforce. So I think that's another connection to your committee, but I'll pause there and see if there are questions I can answer about our constituent services. And then if we have enough time, I'd love for Kelly to plug a little bit of the unemployment work that we've been doing over the last couple of years.
Any questions, Jared?
I hope this is germane to the topic, but do you have a digital copy of this by chance?
I will email it to Andrew after,
fantastic.
for those of you who prefer electronic. Because it does have all of our direct numbers, we do prefer not putting it on the website for the whole general public because we do have intake systems rather than necessarily coming directly to each of us.
Okay,
But
out
yes.
of curiosity, do you have a is I know several organizations that would greatly benefit
Yep.
from just knowing this exists. So would it be possible to have a less
So on our website, which is vtlegalaid.org, we do have descriptions of each and every one of our projects.
okay.
And then we also have a legal help website, and the link to that, vtlawhelp.org, is at the top here. And that's where people can get tons and tons of information on a whole wide variety of issues. So if they want to just learn more about like the Social Security process, they can do that on our website. If they want to learn about the different steps in an eviction process and what to expect, they can learn about that, and then they can also call us for help.
No, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the struggles, especially in this days, that wonderful programs like this exist, but people have to know about them too.
Yes.
This is the first I've heard about it today, so
Okay.
I thank you for your work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Rachel. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the House Discrimination Law Project piece of it. And because we're in such a tight housing market, I'm just curious what you're seeing on your end with clients who are, might be getting jobs here in Vermont or trying to relocate or whatnot. And then that added layer of a barrier, not to mention you can't even find housing, but that piece around the competitiveness of trying to get into any urban housing that one can find.
So our Housing Discrimination Law Project is federally funded by HUD. And it has kind of three parts at this point. One part is education and outreach. So they teach folks about, fair housing law and what the rules and requirements are. The second part is the testing coordinator position, where either because of complaints that we've received or because of a new building being built or just, the need to assess, how are people being treated, we pay our testers and they go in and so, for example, if there's a concern someone with a disability is being discriminated against, we send a non-disabled person and a person with a disability to apply for an apartment, for example, and assess what the difference is and how they're treated. Same with BIPOC folks, same with, we can test for single person versus person with a family, all that sort of thing. So we do that housing testing. And then there's also the casework that people can call and ask for assistance if they believe they've been discriminated against. We can investigate that, make a complaint to the Human Rights Commission, or even do affirmative litigation against the discriminating party, whether that's a landlord, whether that's a bank, whether that's some other realtor or someone else that is covered by the Fair Housing Act. In terms of how it's impacting the housing market right now, I think it's just one more layer of what makes it so difficult to find housing. So, if you are a person with a disability, there's less accessible housing than there is housing, right? Like there are just very few units of accessible housing. And I know a lot of my counterparts in the disability world are talking about, can some of the VHIP money that's being used to bring units back online be used to not bring them online, but bring them online and make them accessible, right? Which I think would be a really good idea, because we've had clients in the Poverty Law Project who have just been paying out of pocket. They're not part of the transitional housing program. They're not part of emergency assistance. They are paying out of pocket to live in a motel for a year or longer because they can't find affordable, accessible housing. So I think probably that's the best way I can describe that impact from where I sit.
Questions for Rachel?
Well, please, I'm in the building a lot. I'm not here every day, but I'm here most days. Mike Fisher is also here most days. So if you need us, come find us. You've got my email, you've got my phone number on this sheet. And then, do we have a couple minutes for Kelly to chat? Or you want to bring Mr. Valerio in first?
And if we have a few minutes, yes, and if we don't, Kelly we have H55, and I know there's another bill that's be coming in as well. But we're gonna need to talk to you on the contents of H55. You were with us on the task force. You had conversations, so certainly we'll ask you to come back in if we don't find time.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for letting me come in and introduce us.
Thank you for joining.
Especially hanging out so long. Morning.
I don't come here very often,
No,
if ever.
we've had you, I think once.
Once, and I've been Defender General for 23 years, so.
I think it's
Once.
good for all of us to, especially our new members, to meet all areas of state government and also we're really particularly interested in workforce issues and, you know, what your office is seeing and the problems you may be having.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, you know, for the record, I'm Matt Valerio. I am the Defender General and have been for a long time. And I've seen changes over my 23-year tenure that are stunning, to say the least. I don't know if you know what we do or how we're set up. I can tell you a little bit about that. Basically, the Defender General system is the largest law firm in the state of Vermont. We have offices, either state employees, staff, or contract offices, providing primary public defense services for indigent folks in every county. That's just the top layer. And then we have conflict contractors in layers below them to handle cases that present a conflict of interest for the primary public defense office. Our budget's about $23 million. We handle about 22,000 cases a year. Chittenden County represents 39% of the state's caseload. You know, we have plenty to do. We also, just as far as our demographic goes, we represent 85% of the people in criminal court. There's 10% of the people in criminal court who have no lawyer because they either choose to represent themselves, but more likely it's they don't qualify for a public defender because the crime that they are charged with would not result in a fine over $1,000 or probation or jail. So if a prosecutor says, you know, I'm not looking for jail, I'm not looking for probation, we'll settle this for a $400 fine, that person is not qualified for a public defender. And then you have about 5% of the people in criminal court who have private counsel. So if you do the numbers, we actually represent over 90% of the people with lawyers in criminal court, which is the most serious cases. We represent basically 100% of the people in juvenile court, in care and protection, CHINS cases, termination of parental rights and the like. We have an appellate division here in Montpelier. We also have a prisoner's rights office, which, while it is a small office, 4 lawyers, 2 investigators, one administrative person, that office represents everybody who's under the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections, incarcerated. So they have immediately 1,300 clients before whether anybody makes a complaint or not, dealing with. So I know Nick Demmel like very well. Talk to him multiple times a week about all kinds of things. He is I will say he's a great credit to that organization. He at least makes me feel that efforts are being made. You know, I didn't think others were not trying, but he's a very good public spokesperson for what's trying to be accomplished at corrections. You know, he's, and so we work together well. My office also sues him all the time. And, you know, one of the great things about Nick is that unlike pretty much everybody else who's ever been a commissioner of corrections, is he's a lawyer. And so when I talk to him about what we've got to do and what's going to happen, it's not personal. It's just, you know, he's a lawyer. He knows what we've got to do. You know, Jim Baker has been a friend of mine for 35 years, back from when he was a trooper in, you know, Bennington County. And, you know, we are actually personal friends. But when I would call him on stuff and I'd have to confront him on things, you know, he'd turn back into the cop on the street and I'd turn back into the defense lawyer and we'd be like, you know, so it wasn't the same kind of communication as much as we were actually good friends with each other. So it wasn't the same type of communication as I have with Commissioner Demmel, just because of our training and experience is different. All right, so back to us and enough with the department. We have had, when I first became Defender General, the office had been in the red for 29 consecutive years. It would run out of money and not pay people. It would, at times, stop taking cases because it was overloaded. I actually do know now. When I got this job, I didn't know how I got this job because I didn't apply for it. I learned later about how I ended up in this job. I had always been in private practice. I had owned multiple businesses, but I did a lot of criminal defense work, and particularly serious cases. I did homicides and sex cases and about 1 billion DUIs, because when you're in private practice, that's where the money is, right? And there are very few people who did, very serious cases on the private side, but I was one of those. There were probably 5 or 10 in the entire state. In any event, I ended up with a job, and I saw, from a business standpoint, I saw structural problems in how it was set up. We restructured. This is back in 2001. First thing I did in 2001, we had a $700,000 budget adjustment on a $6.7 million budget. I had to come over. Robert Appel, my predecessor, had asked for that. I went in and said, look, this is what we're going to try to do. At the end of the year, we did get the budget adjustment, but we ended up with an $83,000 surplus. So it ate up, almost more than a 10% deficit. And then we've been within budget without budget adjustment for 22 consecutive years because of the restructuring that we did. We also have done things like set up serious felony units that deal with all the homicide cases, with the best and the brightest lawyers, criminal lawyers that we have in the state. Not that everybody's going to cheer about this. We cheer about it. But, yesterday there was an acquittal in a homicide case that was handled by one of our serious felony units in Brattleboro. And we've had a number of those over the years. In the past, those cases were just kind of spread out to who would ever be willing to take it. Staff offices were overloaded. And so you'd have ad hoc counsel who were brought in just to pick them up, and they did the best they could. And you try to get the best people who would take it. But the bottom line is you'd have to just have somebody who was willing to take it. So probably just something that you're a little bit more interested in is sort of the workforce side of this. When I was first DG in 2001, if I had an opening in Chittenden County for a staff attorney in the office there, I would get 100 to 150 resumes applying for that job. If I have the same opening now, I'll get 3 to 5 resumes. And none of them are usually licensed in the state of Vermont. If I have people who are applying anywhere outside of the Burlington-Montpelier corridor, really, I will be stunned, because usually we don't get anybody applying for public defense jobs outside of the Burlington-Montpelier corridor. In Rutland, I had an opening that stayed open for 18 months. We had no applicants for 10 months after putting it up. And then people were applying who were just, they weren't licensed. They'd never done criminal law before. They all just try this kind of, I don't hire people like that. You got to at least demonstrate some interest in your career in doing criminal law. Even coming out of law school, there are law schools like Northeastern and Western New England. It's not Harvard, but they have programs that are specifically designed to create public defenders. Those people are not applying here. So we have an issue with, honestly, with Vermont Law School. Vermont Law School produces almost no Vermont lawyers. They graduate 100, 100 people. They have classes that start in the 150 range. They graduate 120. 85% of the people who graduate don't even look to become licensed in Vermont. Of the people who are left, there's a less than 50% pass rate. They're now on probation with the ABA regarding their accreditation because their pass rate is lower than the amount required for accreditation. And so they're producing 7, 8 lawyers, maybe 10 a year, who are even licensed to come into Vermont. And of those 10, some of them are getting like judicial clerkships, some of them are going. So we don't even have people applying from there, except for I hired one recently from there to fill in it's essentially a limited service position in Lamoille County. And she's grew up in Vermont and went to UVM, went to Vermont Law School. Those are rare. Those are few and far between. So we aren't getting lawyers applying for jobs in Vermont being produced out of Vermont Law School. 25 years ago, that was not the case. We had lots of people coming out of Vermont Law School and a lot of them were interested in doing public defense. We had a nice kind of stream, and they were very good too. I don't want to necessarily speak badly of the quality of the students going into VLS, but they're not great. They needed to stay open. They went through recessions just like the rest of us did. There was a time when law school admissions dropped 60%, and people generally were not going to law school. A lot of law schools basically then said, all right, we're going to take people who we wouldn't otherwise take as long as they had good credit and a checkbook. You could, and if you didn't make it, you didn't make it. But, unfortunately, VLS, I think, got caught in that. And so quality candidates coming out of there wasn't great either. In any event, the public defense system is getting caught in that same business milieu that you see, where we don't have, honestly, enough lawyers in Vermont to do the work. I believe right now, I have every single person who wants to do public defense work is currently under contract or working for the Defender General's office. I don't have anybody asking me for a job. And even when I advertise, or I will even go and recruit, there's people I think, hey, this person might be good, not an interest. And I think we're fighting a bit with the public sector, fighting a lot with the public sector. I'm going to give you an example. Because we aren't getting people out of like VLS, we have to look regionally. And regionally means Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, New England, some northern New York, but for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be a place that we get folks from. I have a niece who graduated from high school here in Vermont, ended up going to Holy Cross, was a good student there, but not number one in her class or something, but a good student. She ended up going to law school, and she went to Catholic University in DC, and again, graduated from there, good student, but not, number one in her class. No, I don't believe she was even, she's probably top third, something like that. And she got out of there, did some internships along the way, and she got a job working for a firm in Boston. Not the biggest firm, not Hale and Dorr that has 15,000 lawyers, but what would be considered a medium-sized Massachusetts type firm of about 400 lawyers, which would be like 10 times the biggest firm in Vermont. Not quite, but it would be enormous in Vermont and Massachusetts. It's not that big a deal. Her starting salary was $200,000 a year. Day one out of law school without having practiced 1 minute of law in her life. They paid her a $40,000 bonus if she stays 6 months. They also gave her Christmas bonus, 10 grand. And by the end if she stays the whole year and does hours, she expects her bonus will be in the range of $30,000 to $40,000. So in her first year of practicing law, she's going to make around $300,000. The starting public defender currently makes $62,000. And so, but public defenders don't expect to make a lot of money. But I've also seen what I believe is a change in mental attitude about the people who want to be public defenders. When I was coming up, and I've been a lawyer 35 years, if you wanted to be a public interest lawyer, you worked for legal aid, you worked for the public defense system. Those were like the main two areas, and there were usually some nonprofit public interest type law firms around that fill in other blanks. People now coming out of law school who want to do public interest work, they want to be attorneys general. They want to be prosecutors. They want to represent victims groups. They want to do lobbying. They don't want to do public defense work. Somewhere along the way, the definition of public interest lawyering changed. And I've believed that I've seen that over this last 20 years, my tenure as DG, that I think has been a major factor. And, you know, I've talked to people like at VLS, the various presidents and deans over the last period of years, and they tell me two things. One is we really aren't here to create Vermont lawyers. That's not our niche. We're a national law school that does environmental interest, which is a whole other business choice, and I'm good. That's fine. But they aren't producing, and we are not here to produce public defenders. That doesn't mean we have not had some come out of there, but it makes our job of recruiting very, very difficult. So our outreach now extends to, we go to law fairs in New York, try to get, recruit people out of there. We try to get interns from, bigger schools in other states, and it is not being particularly successful. I worry we have an aging bar as a whole in Vermont. My system, the DG system, I have people in their 70s working in staff public defense offices. Some of the people I think are the young ones are in their 60s because I hired them. I mean, when I started DG, I was 37 years old. I'll be 60 this year. And so I used to be the young guy. I'm not the young guy anymore. And, the people who have come along, we see all of the things with an aging workforce that you see. Cancer, death, disease, just not being able to handle the stress of what a public defense system needs to do. And we're coming out now with a massive court backlog it's not the number of cases coming in, and it wasn't the caseload before. Before the pandemic, we were in okay shape. Public defenders on average had 70 to 90 cases, which is very handleable when you have a mix of misdemeanors and felonies. The serious cases were handled by the serious felony units. The next tier down by our caseload relief contracts. Things were pretty good. Then the pandemic hit, and we didn't get trials for 2 years. And nothing happens if you can't get a hearing or a trial. And the courts will tell you they were open. I don't know. They weren't open. All right. You might be able to walk in the door, but you couldn't get a hearing. And so now the pending caseloads have more than doubled for those attorneys. And, I don't know if I were 77 years old and working in the St. Albans office, which, by the way, we've had two people over 70 there working. I don't know as a public defender if I could do that. That whole thing makes it difficult for us to recruit. So, these are the challenges that we face. One of the things that is also interesting about our system, and I've been trying to get at this for 20 years, is the whole concept of loan repayment assistance. If you work for a state public defender organization and legal aid as well, you get loan repayment assistance if you stay in it, if you start and you stay in it for 10 years. And there's a couple of different programs. There's John R. Justice. There's another loan repayment that deals with these issues. One of the things I'm seeing is people coming in, they won't even sign up for the loan repayment assistance. Because if you leave and go out to private practice, there's a lump sum repayment that's required. So I had somebody who worked for me for 5 years in Rutland and said, I'm out of here. I want to go to a private practice. And the feds basically said, yeah, well, now you owe us $38,000 for the 5 years that you, the deferral money that you had during that period of time. She was like, oh my God, if I only knew. Well, that whole situation spread like wildfire. Nobody was signing up for the loan repayment assistance. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you've got our contractors out there doing the exact same work as the staff attorneys. And under federal law, they don't qualify for loan repayment assistance because they aren't working for a state. They have their own law firms under contract with the DG. They aren't working for their own. So, I've been tinkering lately with ideas about, what if the people who are out there set up private nonprofits like they do in other states for their main public defense systems, and they could have a private business and a separate corp and a private nonprofit in the other. It's very interesting. Our public defenders, believe it or not, because we all hear the jokes about the public pretenders and all that. Very, very bad stereotype, because these folks are literally the best criminal lawyers in the state, bar none. And if there's somebody who is working in private practice, chances are they were public defenders before they ever took it to private practice and started making, big money. But by the same token, when I tried to talk to criminal lawyers about, look, you just set up a private nonprofit here, and you do it, and then you do a regular business on here, and you run them separately, and the money they glaze over. They have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. I was before I was a DG, I had multiple businesses. I had a law firm and then 3 other businesses, and I had always worked in, growing up, had multiple jobs in a lot of different areas, and then as time went by, I figured out that I just ended up owning the businesses that I used to work in, kind of thing. So I had this business experience that I would bring to it. So it didn't bother me. These concepts are not difficult, but for our folks, they are. It's not so easy. And I don't know how to get around some of that. I also don't know, by the way, if we did that, whether it'd work. It's an idea that I have. But you don't want to do this thing, sign up for loan repayment assistance, say I'm working for a nonprofit. Then the feds say, oh, no, we aren't going to accept that as a way to get loan repayment assistance. And then they come after you for the $38,000 that just happened, like we had with the other woman. So, we have a lot of challenges out there. I right now know that the only thing we can do is put one foot in front of the other and keep going. One thing about public defenders that I do know is they never quit. they just put one foot in front of the other. Next case, next case, next case. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's going to be years before we get out of the backlog situation that we're dealing with right now. I wouldn't be surprised, because misdemeanors, the lower end cases, are getting pushed to the back of the bus. You're going to see down the road 6, 7, 8-year-old misdemeanors that have not been disposed of. Cases filed now we have ones in 2018, 19, but we've got to take the incarcerated people and the serious felonies before we ever get to those, and it's going to be something before we resolve that issue. I know I had come and spoke to you before about, our unemployment situation. I don't remember which of our governors coined the term nothing burger, but it ended up being a nothing burger. It's like the department had its opinion, which basically had no legal effect on anything. Because we don't withhold for unemployment insurance, if you remember the issue. So Yeah, it's not nothing we have to worry about.
Heather?
Could you give me an example of one of those misdemeanors that would be put back for 6 years or?
Retail theft, driving with your license suspended, a DUI 1, unlawful mischief, which is, somebody puts a brick through a plate glass window, but it's only a little glass. The difference between felony and misdemeanor in that area is just how big is the plate glass, is it a great big one or a little one like one of these, but it's that kind of thing. And it could be things also like simple assaults, domestic assaults.
But those things can escalate that behavior, right? Or.
I don't know. I mean, 80% of the people who get charged with a criminal case and end up in court, they never come back. You never see them again. But there's 20% of the people who you see once they get in the criminal system, they'll be in the criminal system until they hit about age 42. And then there's a massive drop off in the incidence of criminality, or at least they get better at it and they don't get caught. I don't know. But the bottom line is they aren't getting charged after age 42, except for very particular types of folks. It's not the misdemeanors that are your problem. The idea of like a gateway crime is, it's kind of a myth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Matt, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you in here and we'll try to
see you in another 5 years.
Well, at least we won't wait for 23.
Yeah. Well, it has only been a couple since my last entry in here, but if anybody ever needs anything, I'm always around the building in my office. You can see it from here. So feel free to get a hold of me and be happy to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, so 1 o'clock, we're on the floor for the governor's budget address. I think we'll probably be done for the day. I don't have anything scheduled for this afternoon after that. Next week, we're working on budget adjustment. We'll be taking quite a bit of testimony on our sections of the budget adjustment. My hope is that we get a letter drafted or beginning to get drafted late Wednesday afternoon, and we can sign off on it Thursday, I hope, so we can get it to appropriations. There's one piece that we've been asked to take a look at, maybe make a recommendation. We did the same thing last year. This is a built to scale match. Remember, Springfield did that last year.
Oh, yes.
So that came in last minute. Here it is again. So EDA is, there's a match with EDA. Now this year it's in at NVDA in the Northeast Kingdom. So they're asking for a assistance in providing it's a 1-to-1 match. So they're, and there has to be some state dollars in there. So they're asking for a $350,000 match from the state. I talked with Chair of Appropriations and with our liaison, and they've asked that if we take the testimony, we'll take a look at it. If it's something that we deem that we would like to support, then we'll put it in our letter to Appropriations and request that they do this in budget adjustment. I think I don't know, but I've been told that it will be in the governor's budget, but it'll be too late. This is a Q2 need like it was last year. So we did the same thing last year. So we'll look at that, and if it's something that we want to support, so we'll be hearing from them on Wednesday. So we'll get the agenda out to you later this afternoon, and we'll be working a little harder next week. So we'll start digging into more things, which I think you'll all be interested in. So with that, have a good weekend. Thanks for your work this week, and if there's anything we can do to help you, just touch base with us.